I'm Frank Vaughn. It's May 6, 2025, and last night I was up way past my bedtime doing an interview with Nadine Ness of Unified Grassroots here in Saskatchewan, which the Saskatchewan NDP is ridiculously trying to label an extremist for simply empowering citizens. This is a grassroots organization that encourages citizens to get involved at any political level, as well as to join any political party. They're nonpartisan. They may find more cooperation out of the Saskatchewan Party versus the Sask NDP, but that's more a mark against the Sask NDP than anything else. I'd encourage you to actually check out the interview just to get a sense of her character. The idea that this person is an extremist is beyond me, but I'm going to open today with a clip from that, but we're going to be listening to Danielle Smith. Now, don't worry about the size of the video. In this instance, size doesn't matter. Just listen.
Alberta will be taking steps to better protect ourselves from Ottawa. As a start, I will soon appoint a special negotiating team to represent our province in negotiations with the federal government on the following reforms requested by our province. We hope this will result in a binding agreement that Albertans can have confidence in. Call it an Alberta Accord, if you will. First, Alberta requires guaranteed corridor and port access to tidewater off the Pacific, Arctic, and Atlantic coast for the international export of Alberta oil, gas, critical minerals, and other resources in amounts supported by the free market, rather than by the dictates and whims of Ottawa. Every province in the country, other than Alberta and Saskatchewan, have coastal port access, and no province needs it more given the size and value of our resources. This will benefit all Canadians to the tune of trillions of dollars of economic activity, including billions for First Nations partners. Second, the federal government must end all federal interference in the development of provincial resources by repealing the No New Pipelines Law, C-69, the oil tanker ban, the net zero electricity regulations, the oil and gas emissions cap, the net zero vehicle mandate, and any federal law or regulation that purports to regulate industrial carbon emissions, plastics, or the commercial free speech of energy companies. These laws are destroying investment confidence and costing Canada and Alberta hundreds of billions in investments each year. They need to go. Third, the federal government must refrain from imposing export taxes or restrictions on the export of Alberta resources without the consent of the government of Alberta. Frankly, all provinces should be given that same respect for their resources. And fourth, the federal government must provide to Alberta the same per capita federal transfers and equalization as is received by the other three largest provinces, Quebec, Ontario, and British Columbia. We have no issue with Alberta continuing to subsidize smaller provinces with their needs, but there is no excuse for such large and powerful economies like Ontario, Quebec, BC, or Alberta to be subsidizing one another. That was never the intent of equalization, and it needs to end.
So I'll tell you right now, that list of demands is not 4 points. There's a lot more than 4 points in there. Some of the most critical as regards Mark Carney is the abandonment of net zero targeting, the repeal of C-69, which is the anti-pipeline bill, the reformulation of equalization. I mean, the entire list is more or less impossible for Mark Carney to deliver on because it runs counter to everything he just campaigned on. It runs counter to everything that we've seen in his book. And this is going to be part 6 of the book review. Today is the day that Mark Carney's in the United States meeting with Donald Trump, and Donald Trump has committed to raising the issue of annexation of Canada outright. Now, this idea, he came in and he said he wants to crush interprovincial trade barriers. He wants to further centralize the federal government. It's not going to work. Quebec's not going to allow it, and Alberta has very strongly come out and said they will not allow it, and Saskatchewan's following along. And I want to remind everybody, a lot of people in this country and a lot of people around the world don't pay attention to Saskatchewan. You're curious about Canada. You're curious about the direction that we're heading in. But I'm telling you, Saskatchewan's been ahead of the curve. The Saskatchewan Revenue Act, the Saskatchewan Firearms Act, the kicking out of federal, whatever you want to call them, land officers from the federal government, threatening them with arrest because they were trespassing on private land, the unlawful rebellion on the carbon tax, which Scott Moe won. We've been doing some pretty incredible things here, punching way above our weight class. And I think, to wrap this up, the Sask NDP jumping out ahead and trying to do the whole Team Canada approach. Like, is Carla Beck trying to run for the leader of the federal NDP? Because the people of Saskatchewan elected her, and the people in Ottawa, the bureaucrats and the government, have been screwing Western Canada. You just heard Danielle Smith talk about the fact that Saskatchewan and Alberta are kept in a box. We're kept in a prison. No guaranteed access to tidewater. No ability to to develop our resources and get them to market by design, by Ottawa's will. And it's long since past time we defied that. And this outsized reaction to even a conversation about sovereignty and autonomy for the Western provinces is so hypocritical on behalf of every single person who's engaging in it and labeling anybody that's talking about sovereignty as some kind of extremist. Meanwhile, Quebec exists, and their entire political architecture is built around this concept of threatening separation like a sword of Damocles hanging over the entirety of Canada. For some reason, we provinces are not allowed to do it, but Quebec can do it all the time, and the media doesn't say anything. The NDP doesn't say anything. They're just allowed to do it. In the entire federal leadership debate cycle, or the election cycle, with the English language and the French language debate, not a single person looked at Blanchett and said, you don't belong on the stage because you're not even trying to become prime minister. Because we don't do that. We respect Quebec, but then it's extremism whenever Western provinces want to talk about it. It is time to have the conversation. It's time to lodge your complaint. It's time to be vocal and loud and say that we, as provinces, are supposed to have all this autonomy, and we want to build things. We don't want to be handed things by Ottawa. We don't want to be a welfare state, and we don't want to pay for the other welfare states or welfare provinces in this country. We want to stand on our own 2 feet. We want to build. We want to be able to do business with the United States. We want to be able to do business with the world, and we want Ottawa to get the hell out of the way. Long since past time. Now, there are plenty of things that I would like to get to outside of this book review, but considering the authoritarian nature of Mark Carney and the fact that this man has been parachuted into our country and is now our prime minister, that so many Canadians bought it, and they did. You can deny it all you want. You can talk about election fraud all you want. You can talk about all the flaws in the electoral system, but I firmly believe that the vast majority of the outcome of the vote is legitimate, and the Liberals have been elected once again by the Canadian people, and specifically Mark Carney, a self-identified European and Irishman, has been given the prime ministership. It is incredible what this country is capable of. But back to the book. We are now in the final part of the book, which is called Reclaiming Our Values. God help us. What does Mark Carney feel our values are? Artificial intelligence can be thought of as prediction machines, which can make better forecasts about the future than humans, and whose accuracy improves with use. That is a terrible take on AI, just as a start. Now, this man's a technocrat. His faith not only in the oligarchs to rule over you and make better decisions on your behalf than you can make for yourself is one thing, but above and beyond that, he views artificial intelligence as an adjunct or an extension of oligarchical power, and he thinks they're prediction machines whose forecasts are better than humans, and their accuracy improves. AI is great. It's a wonderful tool. It's actually better than search engines, but you are in the driver's seat. AI will tell you whatever you tell it. AI will respond to your questions and eventually will give you whatever you want. You have to be discerning. You have to be neutral in its usage, and you have to verify its facts because it's not perfect. It's not a replacement for reason. It's not a replacement for human will. But I suppose the very term technocracy implies outsourcing your trust and outsourcing your thinking to technology in the end. The implication is transhumanism. Another quote, the Edelman Trust Barometer for 2020 finds that in approximately 2/3 of the countries sampled, trust in government and the media to do what is right was below 50%. Trust in the very wealthy, and as discussed in Chapter 7, the financial sector is also quite low. The response to this lack of trust in institutions has been to look elsewhere. A person like yourself is now as credible as a technical expert and far more credible than a CEO or a government official, reflecting a shift in trust toward family and friends apparent on social media. Family and friends, verification, trust in those who are telling you the truth versus those who are selling you a narrative and lying to you every single day is a threat, a direct threat to the class that Mark Carney represents. It's a direct threat to his technocracy. This was in 2020. This trust barometer has only fallen since. They lied to us about C-19. They've lied to us about climate change, and now I'm probably going to have one of them UN labels again that YouTube loves putting on my videos. Fine, go ahead, put your label on there. They have lied to us. Mark Carney lied to us in his campaign. He either lied to us in his campaign or he lied to us in this book, because many aspects of his campaign contradict this book, and many aspects of this book contradict the man that was campaigning. He contradicted himself on the campaign trail. Now, to the 40% of people who voted for him, that didn't matter. They just blindly follow. They don't bother to do analysis. They haven't read his book, or dangerously so, those who have read his book, if they're even real. Some of them have showed up in my comments saying that this is the way, that the government should, one guy came in and he said that the government should own all housing and you should pay rent to the government, because at least then it doesn't go to the greedy financiers and doesn't go to the greedy companies and investment companies that own the real estate, completely bypassing the fact that Mark Carney is one of those very people that he's talking about, and that your country is run by those people and run to their benefit. I don't know how many of you out there are like me, but whenever I read a mainstream news article and they start talking about experts, I cringe inside, because their experts are always selected on the basis of the views that they espouse. The other experts who might have a contrary point of view never get press, they never get play, your government never talks about them. And that was one of the things about Saskatchewan. Even at in the middle of the C-19 debacle, they actually listened to the alternative voices, and they were the first to lift the mandates as a result. Somebody mentioned in the comments on the video last night with Nadine that they wish that Mo would come out and directly apologize and take responsibility for the whole thing. And I agree with the sentiment, and I think every government in this country and pretty much around the world, other than a few notable exceptions, got swept up in the zeitgeist. They came to the game late. You know, I could absolutely understand why people were fearful in December of 2019, in January and February and March, because there were so many unknowns and the government's script was completely opposite from the one that they adopted. But the fact remains, and this is something else too, that the public was demanding this stuff because the public was very fearful coming into late 2020 and into 2021. Governments were under immense pressure and didn't want the liability of tens of thousands of deaths on their hands that they thought they were going to meet. They were relying on bad information. They were relying on the experts. But in the end, Saskatchewan was among the first to lift the mandates and very publicly indicated that they would not be coming back. So I appreciate that. And that's one of the reasons that I live here now and decided to bring my very young children here to raise them. And there's a lot more reasons than that. But this notion of expert, this word expert in the MSN just drives me nuts. From the book, during the COVID crisis, public health officials have occupied center stage in many respects, wielded de facto power over the day-to-day life of whole populations, the logical implication of government commitments to follow the science. Over the course of the pandemic, scientists were encouraged to give and then forced to reverse clear advice on issues as varied as the impact of the transmission of the disease by asymptomatic patients, wearing masks, the 2-meter rule, and quarantining inbound travelers. All of those things that are listed at the end of that quote were opposed initially by all the health experts universally that were in government. And then they came in and they implemented them, and then eventually they had to lift them. There are people out there so broken that they insist that COVID's not over. Do you know that? Do you see them online? Talking about COVID's airborne and we're still all going to die according to them. Their minds are broken because of this snip-snap of your health officials, which was one of the reasons why I advised early. We're talking December, January, February, March, early. December 2019, early 2020. I didn't know how deadly the thing was going to be. I thought it could be quite deadly, but I didn't know. But one thing that really got my attention was the government was downplaying it. They were allowing planes to come in, and they were essentially allowing whatever it was to spread in the country. And your best defense was, number one, don't partake in any medical experimentation. I brought virologists, I brought vaccine experts on the show, and I communicated their words, which were anything that came out in the next several years was too early. And instead, they rushed something to market within a year. And their advice was to stay away from it. And in order for you to maintain your peace of mind. Build up some resilience, build up some supplies, build up some food growing capacity, learn how to hunt, do all these things that make you resilient, and then know what limited rights you actually had on your quote-unquote private property here in Canada, which your home and your domicile and your residence were pretty much the only place you had power. And another thing was, if you submitted yourself to testing and you got a positive test, that was going to void all your rights. You were then going to be swept up in the system that the experts were creating on bad medical advice. So my thought was to just avoid testing altogether. I never had to take a test. I resisted taking any tests because a positive would really screw up your life, and your only protection was to avoid it. At any rate, these guys did a lot of damage, and Mark Carney expresses wonder at the fact that trust in technocrats, trust in expertise, trust in the rich and wealthy. Do you guys remember Jason Kenney meeting on a rooftop without a single mask on, drinking expensive booze? They were all doing it. They rubbed our faces in it. Justin Trudeau was flying around the world, going to Europe and having parties and bars while you couldn't go out and do anything. No masks in sight. They were taking pictures of it and putting it online. We had videos of them posing for pictures with masks on, and as soon as they got their picture, they all peeled them off and were laughing amongst themselves because they think the people are fools, and maybe they're right. But that's part of why we're here. We're going to try and change that, and we're trying to bring attention to the fact that Mark Carney was one of the architects of this system. It shouldn't be forgotten what happened, and you must understand who he is, what he espouses. In yesterday's video, talking about the relocation of 1.6 billion people in the next 3 decades, that's 58 million people a year, roughly. That's a lot. The biggest social engineering experiments on the planet is what he's talking about in his book. This man leads our country. Back to the book. The mistrust of experts and expertise is being stoked by the rise of populist politics. Populism is a specific form of identity politics that makes a moral claim to representation of the true people. It is by nature anti-pluralist and anti-elite, promoting an us versus them mentality that places all wisdom in the people, who can be identified by their support for the populist policies. This man's scorn for you, for the little people, is very clear. He believes that himself and the class that he is from are better equipped to manage your life than you are. That populism, which by its very definition, populism are popular ideas, popular with the masses. There's nothing wrong or inherently flawed about populism. And this idea of a moral claim to represent the true people, where does he even get that idea from? It's a product of his scorn for the people, not the true people, but for all people. Anti-pluralist and anti-elite. If the elites haven't done such a bad job, if they haven't been so thoroughly screwing the people over, there wouldn't be an anti-elite bias. Anti-pluralist, what could be more pluralist than something that is popular among all the people? There's nothing inherently flawed about populism, but to Mark Carney, he views it as an existential threat to his class, and he should. So recall what we just went over when he's talking about populism. Listen to this. Transparency serves little purpose if the information is inaccessible to stakeholders because of language or cannot be assessed by them because of complexity or context. This whole darn book is an exercise in dry, analytical, statistical language, which is why most people don't read it. I'm sure a lot of people pick it up, and in the first 10 or 20 pages, they give up because it's like popcorn farts. It's so dry. Stakeholders need effective transparency with information provided in ways that empower individuals to judge trustworthiness for themselves by assessing its quality and differentiating facts from falsehood. So he just complained about populism. He just complained about the people assessing things for themselves and making decisions for themselves, independent of elites and experts, and what an existential threat this idea of populism is. And then just a little further on, he says that you need to be able to judge trustworthiness for yourself and assess the quality and differentiate fact from falsehood by yourself with decomplicated language. The ability of this man to contradict himself within the same couple pages is matched only by his ability to contradict himself in public, in front of cameras. Like I've said before, he can be completely contradicting something that he said 30 seconds or a minute ago, and his body language rings with truth. He's one of the most dangerous people to ever lead this country, and he is an existential threat to Canada. The people who voted for him because they think he's here to save Canada, you people are the ones that are placing the nail above the coffin lid and starting to do the hammering. And I'm trying to wake you up. Back to the book. As a consequence, when COVID hit, we had the necessary credibility when we said that the banks were part of the solution. We were trusted. But didn't he just say that in 2020, finance, the elites, the trust in them was below 50%? Once again, he's just spinning a yarn. He's just telling a story. The people do not trust the central banks. The people do not trust high finance. They don't trust the bankers who just create money out of thin air. You're coerced into submission. The government has a monopoly on the guns. The government has a monopoly on the law. The government is aligned with finance. The government is aligned with central banking. It's not that they have trust. It's that they have all the power. This raises the risks that people conclude that the bank can do more than it can, and that they conflate an independent technocratic institution with the political process. Isn't he describing in this entire book how the technocratic institutions are indeed part or even above the political process? And then here he derides that conflation, a conflation he's been making this entire book. Do you understand the man has no center? He doesn't have a firm grounding. He's just floating around. What are his actual motives? I think it's class self-preservation, to be honest with you. I think it's the preservation of the oligarchical class and their empowerment. But the fact that there's no center in this book, that he can, his morality floats. It's selective. It's non-existent. Further to that, check this out. As I testified to the House of Lords Economic Affairs Committee in April 2016, this is the fundamental standard of an open and transparent central bank. Assessing and reporting major risks does not mean becoming involved in politics. Rather, it would be political to suppress important judgments that relate directly to the bank's remits and which influence our policy's actions. He got involved directly in Brexit. This entire book is about politically and economically, re-engineering the world, socially, economically, politically, you name it. The whole book is about the key role that central banking, finance, and the insurance companies, the only things that are real in his mind, because Main Street is never mentioned, building things is never mentioned. It's all about balance sheets and money to this man, that they are in a position to wield their power above and beyond politics to dictate how the world evolves. And here he talks about open and transparent central banking. Does central banking seem open and transparent to you? Or is it opaque? Is it political for the central banks to just print money and hand it to the government? For their programs, for their massive scale spending, for the very things that got us into the inflationary problem that we are in right now? The massive COVID spending over a respiratory infection that was highly survivable to the vast majority of the population. All they did was underwrite politics. And here he is claiming that they're not really involved in the political process when they are central to it. Again, more of the hypocrisy. Arguably, we need such inclusive processes in all of society more than ever. All of us as individuals have a responsibility to be more open and to engage respectfully with different views if we want constructive political debates and to make progress on important issues. Unless you're populist, then you're an existential threat. Unless you want to present ideas that the global climate is much more complicated than the CO2 humanity produces, you're not allowed at the table. If you like your internal combustion engine, you're not going to get listened to in Mark Carney's world. If you're against DEI, SDGs, global control of your life, you don't get a seat. How can he write this? You and I think the vast majority of the people who are watching this channel and watching this video, you and I would not be able to do this. We wouldn't be able to engage openly with this level of hypocrisy and contradiction. It's paradoxical. It's like antimatter and matter combining in word format in a book. And it's incredible that the book can contain the contrary forces that are at work. He literally has no respect for alternative opinions. He derides them. And then here he is calling for that very thing. Now, this is a character one. This is paying attention to the nostalgia which he writes with. I recall my first such dinner on a dark, cold February evening, high atop Basel's Bank of International Settlements Tower. It was early March 2008, and the American Investment Bank, Bear Stearns, was on the ropes. Among many other messes, Bear was tangled up in the derivatives and money markets that were dragging down the nonsensical ABCP complex described in Chapter 7. Don't worry about that. No one knew what would happen if Bear Stearns suddenly collapsed. Time was of the essence as Asian markets would open shortly, but the president of the European Central Bank, Jean-Claude Trichet, who chaired the meeting, took his time to welcome me. He explained the unique setting, the candid nature of the discussions, and the circle of trust among the oligarchs. After about 10 minutes, once he'd finished, he said, "Now, if we don't act in the next hour, all is lost." Within an hour, we had agreed to supply at the time unheard of $200 billion of liquidity to markets, helping bridge the bank until it was rescued by a competitor. This is standard operating procedure in his mind. Men and women sitting atop the highest towers and the most powerful institutions, thinking that the world would end if Bear Stearns actually reaped the consequences of the business that they'd done. And so out of thin air, they created $200 billion in liquidity, which is $200 billion in cash, to save them. That cash came out of your pocket, even though it was never in your pocket in the first place. It was created at the expense of your purchasing power and at the expense of the purchasing power of your money. It was inflationary from the moment it was created. It was interest-bearing from the moment it was created. And it was done to save his friends, to save high finance, to save those who cooperate every single day with the central banking and banking cartel. And in his mind, this is nostalgic. In his mind, this is good work. One last quote before the close. But when following the crisis, talking about the financial crisis, the Bank of England doubled in size and tripled in responsibilities, we knew our rigid hierarchy had to change. Has it changed? Has the hierarchy of central banking changed in the world? Have central bankers become more open and transparent? Or has it become or remained just as opaque as it was in the past? Is their power any reduced? Or is it greater today in the wake of the financial crisis and in the wake of COVID than it was in past? Their power only grows. Their balance sheets only grow. Their ability to print money is unchecked. They don't have political oversight. They're not public institutions, they're private institutions. They stand apart and above politics. There's a quote, a famous quote, "I care not for who controls the government," and I'm paraphrasing. It's something, I don't care who controls the government. I care who prints the money. That's where the power lies. Mark Carney comes from among these people, and he shares their motives, their goals, and their objectives. And he's going to engineer Canada around that vision. Now, he may play nice at the moment because he has a minority government. He may say all kinds of things to Danielle Smith to assuage her fears and to try and stave off a nascent separatist movement. But as we've seen in this book, there's not a thing that this man says that can be trusted or believed. His center is impossible to identify. I have spent almost a month now trying to find his center, seeking that center in his own book, seeking that center in his own words, seeking that center in his work. And the closest I can come to is actions. I have to judge him on his actions. Who has he served his entire career? What interests has he advanced? And what worldview does he consistently align himself with? And it's the one in the last two quotes that we've gone over today. The one where the ability to print money out of thin air, to rob you through inflation, to save big finance when they fail because of the practices that they've engaged in, to blame populists, to blame the market. He's consistent in all of these things. And people really should understand it, because There's a wake-up call coming for the people who voted for him. And on this side, where I'm coming from, my door is always wide open. When you figure it out, I'll be here to welcome you.